The stars were dying above us, their light stretched thin as candle flame across the gulf of space. Whole shrine worlds glimmered like distant embers in a cathedral of darkness, each one burning out beneath banners too old to name. Gunmetal husks of pilgrim ships drifted silently between ruined sectors, their decks cold, their hymns unspoken. All across the Imperium's vastness, faith seemed to echo without a voice. And before we walk into that echo, I want to pause with you. We truly love and care for you. Every story we tell is meant to hold you gently in its light. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let your answer linger in your mind like a whispered prayer. Now let's get started. The dying sun swelled on the horizon of a nameless system, casting copper light across the void. Fragments of once holy cathedrals floated there, shattered spires turning slowly in zero gravity, stained glass splintered into a million jeweled shards. Each shard caught a ray of the fading sun and turned it into a memory of devotion. Blue saints, crimson martyrs, golden halos refracting like ghosts. In the heart of this ruin, aboard a drifting basilica ship called the Sepulchre of Dawn, a single sister knelt. Her armor, once ivory, was stained by ash and centuries of penitence. She bowed before a cracked reliquary carved from meteoric stone. Within lay a splinter of some ancient saint's banner, its edges blackened, its cloth stiff with age. The reliquary trembled with the faint hum of the ship's life support, or perhaps with her own unspoken doubt. She was called Sister Superior Althea in the records, but the name felt like a borrowed mask. She had carried it for 270 years, long enough to watch 9 crusades rise and fade, long enough to see her novices age and die while she endured. Her vow had been simple: eternal service, unflinching faith. Yet in the long silence of warp-haunted nights, visions had begun to seep into her dreams. They were not of saints. They were of hollow thrones, of candles snuffed out by a breath she could not see. And always at the center of those visions, a question she dared not speak. Was devotion a fire, or merely the ash left after it burned? Althea's gloved fingers traced the reliquary's edge. Tiny fractures spiderwebbed the stone, mirroring the cracks in her certainty. Around her, the basilica ship's chapel was deserted, rows of stone pews buckled by ancient impacts. Faded frescoes of the emperor's miracles stared down with sightless eyes. The air smelled of machine oil and old incense, as though prayer and war had mingled until they were indistinguishable. Outside, the galaxy rolled on. Pilgrim fleets crossed void lanes under tattered banners, their hymns transmitted over vox as static. Asteroid shrines glowed faintly with memorial fires for saints no one remembered. Even the stars themselves seemed weary, red giants, bloated and flickering, white dwarfs cooling into black embers. Each system told a fragment of the Imperium's story, and each fragment whispered of endings. Althea closed her eyes and whispered the litany of the unbroken flame. Her voice, low and rough, filled the chapel like smoke. She tried to feel the certainty it once gave her. Instead, her mind drifted back to her first novitiate on Ophelia 7. She remembered the scent of rain on basalt cloisters, the warmth of candles, the fierce glow in her heart. She remembered kneeling beside her rival, a younger sister whose ambition had always glimmered like a blade. She remembered their mentor's voice, soft yet unwavering, teaching them that faith was not the absence of doubt, but its conquest. But somewhere along the centuries that teaching had hardened. Each crusade demanded another compromise, another atrocity accepted for the sake of victory. Each relic recovered was another myth proven hollow. Faith had become an armor, she wore because she feared what lay beneath. A tremor passed through the ship as a distant thruster fired. Dust fell from the frescoes like dry snow. Althea rose from her knees, the servo joints of her armor whining softly. She lifted her helmet from the floor and cradled it against her chest. The visor reflected the cracked reliquary, and faintly her own eyes, dark, lined, searching. "Emperor, preserve me," she whispered, "or teach me how to end." In the corridor beyond the chapel, the ship's choir of servitors sang an endless canticle to maintain the warp shields. Their voices were mechanical, stripped of humanity, yet each note carried a melancholy echo. Althea walked past them slowly, her boots ringing on the ferrocrete. The basilica ship was a labyrinth of forgotten shrines and sealed reliquaries. She alone had the keys to most of them. Every door she passed seemed to exhale a little breath of incense and memory. She paused before a viewport. Beyond it, a shrine world burned. Blue fire licked up from its equatorial cities, consuming cathedrals that had taken centuries to build. The Vox reported heretics, but she had heard that word too many times to believe it uncritically. Perhaps the world's faithful had simply reached the end of endurance. Perhaps they had asked the question she now asked, and found no answer but fire. In her gauntlet, she held a tiny rosarius of jet beads, its chain worn smooth. Her mentor had given it to her on the day of her elevation. One bead was missing, lost on a battlefield whose name she had forgotten. She rolled the beads between her fingers and thought of the visions again. The hollow thrones, the snuffed candles. She felt as though the galaxy itself were kneeling before a cracked reliquary, waiting to see if anything still lay inside. A chime echoed through the basilica ship, a summons from the canoness. Althea tucked the rosarius back under her gorget and walked toward the command sanctum. Her steps were steady, but inside she felt the slow turning of a wheel she could not stop. Each echoing footfall was a heartbeat of an empire fading, of vows fraying like old banners. She passed a mural of St. Catherine holding a flaming sword. The paint had peeled, leaving the saint's eyes as blank white voids. In that blankness, Althea imagined the gaze of her rival, Sister Mireia, last seen decades ago leading a crusade into the halo stars. Mireia had always believed faith was not enough. She had spoken in whispers of relics that could make a sister unending. Althea had reported her once, but no censure came. Now rumors drifted through the Vox, a new doctrine spreading, a harsher creed gathering followers. The command sanctum doors opened with a groan. Candlelight spilled across her armor. The canoness stood within, a figure of iron devotion. Her face was unreadable, her hands clasped around a staff of office etched with litanies. She spoke without preamble. "A shrine moon has fallen. You will lead the retrieval." Althea inclined her head. "As you command." But inside, the words tasted like ash. Retrieval of what? Relics? Souls? Or perhaps something darker? The canoness's eyes glimmered in the candlelight, as though she knew Althea's thoughts. "Doubt is a wound," she said softly. "Bind it before it bleeds." Althea left the sanctum without reply. The corridor beyond felt colder, the servitor's canticle more discordant. She returned to the chapel one last time before departure. The reliquary still waited, cracked but unbroken. She knelt again, not in prayer, but in contemplation. Her reflection stared back at her from the reliquary's polished stone like a stranger. Outside, the dying suns burned lower. Pilgrim ships moved like shadows between the stars. In some distant sector, a younger sister might be making her first vow, full of fire. Here, on the sepulchre of dawn, Althea felt only the weight of centuries pressing on her shoulders, and the faint tremor of a coming choice. She rose at last and turned toward the embarkation deck. The saga had begun, though she could not yet see its shape. All she knew was that the galaxy was changing, faith was burning, and somewhere ahead, her rival waited with a new doctrine and a blade hidden in devotion's sleeve. The banners of the Imperium drifted in the void, faded but not yet gone. Althea adjusted her armor, whispered a last fragment of the unbroken flame, and stepped into the dark corridors where her sisters waited. The Basilica ship's engines rumbled to life, their vibration like a deep hymn. Beyond the viewport, the stars looked like dying eyes. Thus began the march toward the shrine moon, toward the reliquary's secret, toward the long road where vows and visions would meet. A single sister carrying centuries of faith and a heart full of doubt, walking into the twilight of an empire. The smell of rain on volcanic stone never left her memory. Even centuries later, Sister Superior Althea would close her eyes and feel again the damp heat of Ophelia Seven's cloisters rising like incense into the night. Back then, she was not a superior, but merely Althea of the Hive Orphanage, one among 100 pale-faced girls in grey novice robes, walking barefoot across basalt courtyards still warm from the day's sun. The stone cut her soles, yet she felt it as a kind of blessing, a harsh touch that said, "This is where the Emperor begins." Ophelia Seven was a world of shrines built upon older shrines, cathedrals stacked like strata of belief. Entire mountain chains had been carved into basilicas, their peaks capped with iron statues of saints whose names had been forgotten before the first stone was set. The sky was perpetually red from volcanic dust, and each evening molten rivers glowed faintly in the distance like veins of living fire. Pilgrim ships came and went, shedding ash like feathers, their wake streaking the upper atmosphere with contrails that resembled dying prayers. Althea's first night within the convent was spent in silence. The dormitory was a long vault of ferrocrete arches, candles guttering along the central aisle. Each novice slept on a stone slab with a thin blanket and a carved wooden icon at the head. Above them, the vaulted ceiling was painted with scenes of martyrdom, saints burning, saints bleeding, saints smiling as their flesh was torn away. She stared up at them until sleep claimed her, wondering which smile might one day be hers. Morning began with bells. They rang not in sound, but in vibration, the low hum of deep chimes set into the walls. Althea woke instantly, heart quickening. She rose, dressed, and followed the line of novices out into the cloisters, where the volcanic mist clung to their robes. The prayers began, a low chorus of voices echoing between black stone columns. Each word was a shaping, a smoothing of their souls like river water over rock. It was during those first weeks that she met Maria. The girl stood out immediately, tall, with eyes like polished iron, her every movement precise. She carried herself not like an orphan, grateful for rescue, but like a commander waiting for her rank. When the canoness passed by, Maria's bow was deeper than anyone's, but when the canoness's back was turned, her lips twisted in a faint smile of calculation. Althea, earnest and untested, felt drawn and repelled at once. Maria whispered during lessons, her words like a fine blade. The saints were not chosen. They chose themselves. Their mentor was Sister Varenne, an older woman whose armor was worn smooth at the edges and whose hands bore scars from centuries of tending sacred weapons. She spoke little, but her eyes were kind, and when she corrected a novice's stance or prayer, she did it with a touch that felt like reassurance rather than rebuke. Varenne seemed to carry a light within her that the cloister's shadows could not touch. Althea found herself lingering after drills to ask questions, and Varenne always answered with patience. Days turned to weeks. The novices learned the rites of maintenance for bolters and flamers, chanting invocations as they cleaned each component. They scrubbed the ferro-vaulted chapels until the stone reflected the flicker of candles. They memorized entire books of hymns, not as song, but as weapon. Each ritual was a shaping of the self, forging obedience, burning away doubt. But beneath the rhythm, small fissures formed. It began with the reliquary vaults. Only the canoness and senior sisters were allowed within. But rumors trickled out like incense smoke, relics too powerful to display, objects so sacred that even a glance could change the soul. Some said they were shards of saints. Others whispered they were older things, predating even the ecclesiarchy. A sword that bled black fire, a veil that let its wearer see eternity. At night in the dormitory, Mireia would speak softly of them, her voice a caress. Why do you think they hide them? Because faith cannot survive the truth. Althea tried not to listen, yet she felt the pull. She had come to the order to lose herself in devotion, but Mireia's questions made her heart beat faster. What if service was only half the path? What if sainthood required something greater, something forbidden? When she confided her confusion to Sister Varenne, the older woman smiled sadly. Faith is a blade, child, honed too fine. It cuts the one who wields it. Training intensified. They were sent on penitential marches across the volcanic plains, carrying relic banners through ash storms until their throats bled from chanting. In the refectories, they ate in silence beneath frescoes of saints devoured by beasts. Each evening they returned to their slabs and lay awake listening to the convent's heartbeat. The hiss of incense vents, the clang of distant forges, the murmured prayers of sisters awake in vigil. It was on one of these marches that Althea saw Mireia break formation to climb a basalt ridge. She returned with something cupped in her palm, a fragment of black glass glowing faintly at the core. Later that night, Mireia showed it to Althea under her blanket. From the reliquary's refuse, she whispered, even the scraps hold power. The shard pulsed like a heartbeat. Althea recoiled, whispering the litany of purity, but part of her wanted to touch it, to feel its promise. Sister Varenne noticed the change in them. During a weapons drill, she called Althea aside, her voice low. Ambition is a shadow, and shadows lengthen at dusk. Keep your eyes on the flame. She pressed something into Althea's hand, a simple rosarius of jet beads, to remind you where your strength lies. Althea felt its cool weight and understood it was both gift and warning. In the months that followed, the convent prepared for a rare ceremony, the unveiling of a saint's armor, newly recovered from a far crusade. Pilgrims filled the cloisters, their footsteps echoing like rain. Incense burned so thick it left black residue on the stone. Althea watched the canoness process through the nave with the relic, Mireia at her side carrying the incense censer. For a moment, the world seemed right, faith shining like steel, duty clear as glass. But that night, Althea dreamed of the armor opening like a coffin, empty within. She woke to find Mireia gone from her slab. Following a hunch, she crept to the reliquary doors and found them ajar. Inside, the air was cold and still. Rows of sealed chests lined the walls, each marked with a sigil she could not read. And at the far end, Mireia knelt before one of them, her hands hovering above the lock as if in prayer. Mireia, Althea whispered. Her voice trembled. What are you doing? Mireia turned slowly. In the dim glow, her eyes caught the light like molten iron, seeking what they hide from us. Don't you want to know what we truly serve? Althea stepped forward, the rosarius clutched in her fist. She thought of Sister Varenne, of the warmth in her voice, of the warnings. She thought of the shard pulsing under Morea's blanket. She thought of the saints smiling as they burned. And she thought, for a heartbeat, of kneeling beside Morea and opening the chest together. Instead, she whispered the litany of vigilance. Morea's expression hardened into contempt. "You'll learn," she said softly, and rose, vanishing into the shadows between chests. Althea closed the door, her hands shaking. The reliquary's cold seeped into her bones. She returned to her slab, but did not sleep. In her mind, the convent seemed different now, less a fortress of faith than a labyrinth of secrets. The prayers at dawn tasted of ash. The candles seemed to flicker with an unseen wind. Sister Varenne noticed. She drew Althea aside after drills, her face unreadable. "Some seeds fall on stone, some on ash. Do you know where you stand?" Althea tried to answer, but found no words. Varenne placed a hand on her shoulder. "Faith is not a cage. It is a fire. It can warm or it can burn." Remember that, from that night onward, Althea watched Morea with new eyes. The rival's ambition no longer seemed a game, but a slow turning towards something vast and dark. And within herself, Althea felt both fear and a strange resolve. She had glimpsed the path ahead, loyalty tested, relics that promised immortality of soul at a price too high to name. Seeds had been planted, of devotion, of doubt, of betrayal. The volcanic stone of Ophelia 7 held them all, waiting for the day they would break the surface. Years later, when Althea would kneel before a cracked reliquary aboard a drifting basilica ship, she would remember these cloisters. She would remember the scent of rain on basalt, the flicker of candles against frescoed saints, the touch of Varenne's hand, the gleam in Morea's eyes. And she would know that the galaxy's twilight had begun here, in the seeds of a convent built on volcanic stone, where prayers echoed through pharaoh-vaulted chapels and whispered heresies moved like shadows beneath the hymns. The days within the convent moved like beads on a rosary, each one polished by repetition until the edges blurred. Morning bells thrummed through the pharaoh-vaulted halls. Novices rose from their slabs without speaking, wrapping their grey robes against the volcanic chill. They filed into the cloisters, where black stone columns lifted prayers into misty air. Outside, Ophelia 7's sky smouldered red with dust, but within the walls everything was ordered. Candles aligned, banners immaculate, footsteps measured to the rhythm of hymns. War might howl across the galaxy, but here it was, only an echo. A rumour drifting in on pilgrim ships that left ash on the landing pads. Althea's days began before dawn. She scrubbed the chapel floors until the scent of stone and incense filled her lungs. She polished relics behind latticed gates. She trained with bolter and blade in the courtyard, where volcanic glass glimmered underfoot. Each act was a prayer. Each prayer was a weapon. Sister Varenne's voice guided them through the rites of cleaning, of loading, of kneeling, until their bodies remembered even when their minds wandered. And their minds did wander. Behind every ritual lurked a question waiting to be asked. At night, the novices returned to their dormitory, where sealed windows muffled the distant thunder of lava flows. Candles flickered in iron sconces, their light weak against the frescoes of martyrdom above. Althea would lie on her slab, staring at those painted saints, and think of the galaxy beyond. Void ships lost in the warp, hive cities drowning in plague, imperial guardsmen praying for deliverance that never came. The hymns they sang in the cloister promised purity, but the whispers that reached them from outside told of compromises, massacres, edicts that turned allies to heretics overnight. She tried to hold both truths in her heart and found it tearing like cloth. Mireia, meanwhile, seemed untouched by doubt. She moved through the rituals with a precision that made instructors nod. Her voice rose above the others in hymnals. Her weapon drills were flawless. The canoness began to notice, calling her forward during ceremonies, assigning her to carry the incense censer or the relic banner. Each time, Mireia's bow was deep, her expression humble, but Althea saw the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. It was not the satisfaction of faith fulfilled, but of ambition rewarded. Between lessons, Mireia whispered of new doctrines she had overheard, stricter codes, harsher litanies, relics recovered from distant crusades whose power might cleanse not just the body, but the soul itself. "We are the Emperor's sword," she would murmur under her breath. "Why sheath the blade?" Althea tried to counter with Sister Varen's gentler teachings, but her words sounded thin even to herself. The world outside was burning. Perhaps a sharper creed was needed. Yet each time Mireia spoke, Althea felt as though a window had been sealed, shutting out light even as it kept out the ash. Hidden beneath her pillow, Althea kept a scrap of parchment she had found while scrubbing an abandoned corridor. It bore a fragment of a hymn attributed to a lost saint. "Faith without doubt is not fire, but ice." She read it at night when the dormitory was silent, tracing the faded ink with her fingertip. The words unsettled her, yet also comforted her, as if the saint had reached across centuries to whisper that uncertainty was not sin, but spark. One evening, Sister Varen found her reading. The older woman's shadow fell across the slab, her scarred hand closing the parchment gently. "Be careful," she murmured. "Some scrolls are hidden for a reason." Althea looked up, heart pounding. "Is it heresy to read them?" Varene's eyes were tired but kind. "Heresy begins not with reading, but with forgetting why you read. Hold your questions as you would hold a blade, firmly, but not by the edge." The next day brought news from the galaxy beyond the cloister. A shrine world had fallen, its defenders executed for apostasy. The canoness read the dispatch aloud without expression, then led the sisters in a hymn of atonement. Althea sang, but her voice trembled. She wondered what those defenders had believed up to the last moment, and whether they had looked up at dying suns as she once had. In training drills, her movements began to slow. The bolter weighed heavier in her arms. She still polished her armor until it shone, but sometimes she stared at her reflection in the metal and did not recognize herself. Mireia noticed, smirking during sparring matches. "Softness," she whispered once as their blades locked. "The galaxy has no room for softness." Yet even as Mireia rose, Althea felt her own sense of something deeper stirring. A quiet defiance not of faith, but of its distortion. She began spending her free hours in the convent's oldest chapel, a tiny apse sealed off from pilgrims. Its windows had been bricked over centuries ago. Only faint shafts of light seeped through cracks in the mortar. Dust lay thick on the altar. There she would light a single candle and watch its flame waver, imagining it as the breath of a saint hidden from the world. Symbolism crept into her dreams. She saw candles extinguished one by one until only darkness remained. She saw windows sealed with iron plates, shutting out not ash, but dawn. She awoke each time with the taste of smoke in her mouth. In the refectory, as the novices ate in silence, she would glance at Mireia and see the glow of ambition around her like heat above stone. The canoness's praise fell on Mireia like sunlight, and Althea wondered if she herself were already fading into shadow. During a lecture on the litany of cleansing, the canoness spoke of a coming inspection by a high-ranking inquisitor. Her eyes swept the novices, as she declared that the order would show absolute devotion. Mirea's back straightened with pride. Althea felt a chill. She remembered the hidden scroll, the fragment of hymn. Faith without doubt is not fire, but ice. She wondered if the Inquisitor would know the difference. Sister Varenne continued to guide her quietly, offering small corrections, subtle encouragement. Once, after drills, she handed Althea a candle whose wick had burned low. "Keep it," she said, a reminder that even a dying flame gives light. Althea carried it back to the bricked-up chapel and set it on the altar. She knelt before it, whispering prayers that felt less like rote and more like reaching. Outside the convent walls, the wars of the galaxy raged. Pilgrim ships brought stories of entire sectors consumed by heresy and purges. The novices heard them only in passing, but the images seeped in like water through stone. Althea began to imagine the faces of those burned for apostasy, the children left behind, the prayers unanswered. She wondered if their faith had failed them, or if the Imperium had failed their faith. Each question was a spark. Each spark threatened to become fire. Mireia, by contrast, spoke of these wars with eagerness. "The galaxy is impure," she said one night, her voice low but urgent. "We are the Emperor's fire. We must burn brighter." She looked at Althea with eyes shining. "Don't you feel it? The time for silence is ending." Althea did not answer. She thought of Sister Varenne's candle, of the hidden hymn, of the sealed windows. She thought of her own hands trembling during drills, and she thought of a future where fire and silence might be indistinguishable. The day of the Inquisitor's inspection drew closer. The convent prepared with feverish devotion, scrubbing every stone, polishing every reliquary. The novices drilled until their muscles ached. Mireia was chosen to lead the processional hymn. Althea was assigned to clean the reliquary vaults alone. As she dusted the sealed chests, she felt the weight of their contents pressing on her like unspoken words. She imagined opening one, seeing not a relic but a mirror reflecting her own doubt. That night, she returned to the bricked-up chapel. The candle Sister Varenne had given her flickered weakly. Wax pooled at its base. She touched the flame and felt its warmth. In that moment, she understood that faith was not the absence of doubt, but the courage to keep the flame alive despite it. She whispered a prayer, not from the hymnals, but from her own heart, that she might walk the path without closing her eyes, that she might hold the blade without cutting herself. In the dormitory, Mireia slept with a faint smile, the canoness's praise still ringing in her ears. Althea lay awake, listening to the sealed windows creak in the wind, the extinguished candles leaving only the scent of smoke. The galaxy outside was burning, and within the convent another fire was being kindled, a doctrine of harshness rising under the guise of purity. She felt the first true tremor of betrayal, like a pulse beneath the stone. Long after the bells ceased and silence settled, she rose from her slab and walked back to the chapel one last time. The candle had gone out. In the dark, she knelt and pressed her forehead to the cold altar. She did not pray. She only breathed, feeling the ash of centuries between her fingers, and listened to the silence until it spoke. The basilica ship, Sepulchre of Dawn, slid away from Ophelia, 7, with a soundless shudder, its massive reliquary engines igniting like muted stars. In the viewing galleries, pilgrims pressed their foreheads to the crystal windows as the world below receded into dust-red cloud. The cloisters of their youth, the pharaoh-vaulted chapels, the sealed windows, they all folded into memory behind Althea like a page closing. Ahead lay the veiled sector, a tangle of uncharted warp lanes, that imperial charts marked only with caution sigils and half-erased prayers. For the Sisters of Battle, the journey was called a pilgrimage. For Althea, it felt more like exile. She stood on the embarkation deck with her bolter slung and her rosarius cold in her palm, watching the shrine moon rise on the nav screens. It glowed faintly under a dying sun, its surface veined with ash-grey rivers. They said heretics had defiled its catacombs, desecrating altars older than the ecclesiarchy itself. The order had been commanded to reclaim it. Yet even as the mission scroll was read aloud, Althea had glimpsed the subtle glance between the canoness and Maria, the new doctrine flickering like a hidden flame. During departure rites, the sisters knelt in the chapel, chanting hymns that vibrated through the hull. Maria's voice led the choir, strong and cold. Althea's joined, softer, almost hesitant. She felt the weight of warp tides gathering around them, like black oceans closing over a ship of light. The candle flames along the altar guttered as if already sensing the journey's danger. The warp took them with a soundless convulsion. Outside the viewing ports, reality smeared into colorless currents. Inside, time lost its edges. Bells marked hours, but the sisters could no longer tell day from night. The servitor choir's voices became a constant drone, their hymn a barrier against entities pressing at the ship's soul. In these timeless corridors, Althea found herself adrift in thought, as if her mortality were a flickering spark inside an endless void. She would walk alone through the nave at what she thought was night. The candles burned down to stubs, wax pooled like pale blood. The ship's machinery whispered in a language of static. Each echo reminded her of the hidden scroll under her pillow back on Ophelius 7. Faith without doubt is not fire, but ice. Here in the warp, the phrase felt literal. The air itself cold, her breath a thin mist. Maria thrived even in this unreality. She strode through the ship in full armor as if on parade, conferring with officers, reciting litanies for the crew. The canoness called her often to private briefings. Althea passed them sometimes in a corridor, their voices low, hands moving over sealed data slates. She would pause in the shadows and catch a glimpse of an inquisitorial rosette embossed on a scroll case. The sight chilled her more than any warp breeze. Since when did inquisitors travel in secret with a pilgrim fleet? And why was Maria, a mere sister, their messenger? On the third cycle, the ship's course faltered. Sirens whispered rather than blared, as if the warp itself demanded silence. The sisters gathered in the chapel to pray for safe passage. Althea knelt among them, head bowed, but her eyes slid sideways to Maria. The rival's lips moved in prayer, but her gaze was far away, as if measuring a calculation. In that moment, Althea saw not a flame of devotion, but a glint of steel under velvet. Her heart stuttered. Later, unable to sleep, she wandered into the reliquary deck where ancient banners hung like dried skins. Here the ship smelled of oil and sanctified dust. She pressed her palm to one of the banners, a frayed scrap of some nameless martyr, and felt nothing but cold cloth. In the warp, relics seemed as empty as the void. Her footsteps echoed. She turned a corner and stopped. Ahead, in the dim green glow of emergency lumens, Mireia knelt before a sealed crate stamped with both ecclesiarchal and inquisitorial sigils. An armoured figure stood beside her, a man in a cloak of crimson, hood drawn low. His gauntleted hand rested on the crate as he spoke. Althea could not hear the words, but she saw the exchange. A data slate passed from his fingers to Mireia's, a tiny nod. The hood lifted just enough to reveal the glint of a rosette. Althea drew back into shadow, heart hammering. The ship's hymn droned on overhead, masking her breath. She had always feared corruption creeping from the outside, heretics and Xenos defiling shrines. But here, in the heart of their pilgrimage, she saw a secret alliance forming, a sister and an inquisitor moving like conspirators in a reliquary's dark. Mireia rose, tucking the slate into her cloak. For a moment she seemed to sense she was watched. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor where Althea hid. They glinted like polished iron. Then she turned and vanished through a side hatch with the Inquisitor. Only the sealed crate remained, its sigils faintly pulsing. Althea stayed frozen long after they were gone. The warp pressed against the hull like deep water. She thought of Sister Varen's candle, of the saint's hymn. She thought of steel quenched in cold water, faith hardened by betrayal or shattered by it. Slowly she backed away and returned to her cell, her rosarius beads slick with sweat. The timeless nights stretched. She avoided Maria, kept her head bowed during drills, whispered her prayers without conviction. Yet paradoxically, her faith deepened, not in the order, not in the Canaanus, but in something quieter, stripped of pageantry. She began to pray in silence. Words dissolved into breath. Each prayer felt like a hammer strike on cooling steel. Doubt was the water, devotion the blade. She imagined herself quenched, tempered, changed. On what passed for the 7th day, the ship broke from warp. The viewports cleared to reveal the shrine moon. It hung against a backdrop of dying stars, its surface a patchwork of grey plains and dark craters. Once it had been called Sancta Lyra, but now the name was scratched from the records. Pilgrim fires still flickered along its equator, but the central catacombs were said to be defiled, their icons blackened, their altars cracked. The canoness assembled the sisters in the embarkation hold. Incense burned in swinging censers. Hymns rose like smoke. She spoke of purity, of reclaiming the Emperor's light. Her gaze lingered on Mireia, who stood at her right hand. Althea felt the distance between them like a wound. They descended to the moon's surface in drop barges shaped like reliquaries. The sky was the color of old iron. Ash fell in thin veils. The landing zone was a field of broken statues half buried in grey dust. Althea stepped onto the surface and felt it shift under her boots like bone meal. She looked up at the catacombs rising ahead, columns cracked, windows sealed with rusted plates. Candles burned in niches, but their flames were blue, flickering as if starved of air. Inside the catacombs, the air was colder. Echoes of forgotten hymns clung to the stone. The sisters moved in formation, bolters at the ready, their footsteps crunching on powdered icons. Althea trailed at the rear, her eyes on Mireia. The rival moved with purpose, leading them down corridors whose layout she seemed already to know. Once Althea caught a glimpse of the Inquisitor ahead, vanishing through an archway. But when she blinked, he was gone. At the central altar, they found the defilement, a mural scorched black, a saint's statue toppled and shattered, an inscription rewritten in a language no one recognized. The canoness ordered purification rites. The sisters began chanting, sprinkling sacred oils, setting up flamers to burn away the taint. Yet as the flames rose, Althea thought she heard a whisper under the chant. A second hymn, discordant, carried on the smoke. She turned and saw Mireia watching her, expression unreadable. Hours passed. The rites continued. Althea moved mechanically, cleaning, chanting, her mind elsewhere. Each sealed window felt like an eye turned inward, each extinguished candle like a question unanswered. She thought of the data slate in Mireia's cloak, of the Inquisitor's gauntlet on the crate. She wondered what bargain had been struck, what doctrine was being smuggled into their order under the guise of purity. When at last the canoness dismissed them to rest, Althea slipped away into a side chapel. It was small, its altar cracked, its candle stubs long melted. She knelt there and closed her eyes. Her breath formed a mist in the cold air. She felt no warmth, yet a strange clarity. If faith was a blade, then doubt had quenched it here. She would not abandon devotion, but she would no longer give it blindly. She would carry it like a weapon she had forged herself. From beyond the chapel, she heard Morea's voice speaking softly, perhaps to the Inquisitor. She could not make out the words. She only felt the tremor of a new creed taking shape in the shadows, a doctrine of fire and silence entwined. She pressed her forehead to the cold stone and whispered her own vow, to walk this path with eyes open, whatever it revealed. Outside, ash drifted through the catacomb halls like grey snow. The sisters' hymns rose again, echoing under sealed windows. And in the heart of it all, Althea knelt, faith shaken yet deepened, like steel quenched in cold water, while the seeds of betrayal took root around her, unseen. The catacombs did not sleep. Even after hours of cleansing rites, the corridors hummed with a low vibration, like a throat preparing to sing. Ash still drifted in veils from the cracked ceilings. The sisters had stacked relics behind sealed curtains, their bolters slung but not unloaded. They believed the shrine moon pacified, yet Althea felt the stone under her boots pulse faintly, as though the moon itself were holding its breath. At the altar's edge, a choir of servitors sang, their metal lungs expelling incense with each note. It was a hymn of expiation, the kind taught only to the dead or the half-dead. Their voices echoed up the columns, filling the catacombs with a sound like mourning bells. Althea knelt among her sisters, head bowed, rosarius beads slipping through her fingers. But she did not pray. She listened. Beneath the servitor's drone, she caught another sound, a shuffle, a metallic scrape, a whispered vow. Not the Emperor's hymn, but something older, hungry. The attack began without trumpet or warning. The far doors burst inward, and figures spilled through like shadows. Cultists twisted by devotion gone rancid, their faces masked with ash, and their hands clutching stolen reliquaries turned into weapons. Some carried lace cutters shaped like censers, others knives wrapped in prayer ribbons. They screamed as they charged, the sound both hymn and howl. Bolters roared in answer. Muzzle flashes lit the catacomb walls in strobes, painting saints and martyrs in flickering crimson. The servitor's hymn did not falter. It rose above the gunfire, a keening that made Althea's teeth ache. Candles toppled and went out, their smoke mingling with cordite. Statues shattered. The sacred became battlefield in the space of a heartbeat. Althea moved on instinct, bolter braced, prayers spilling from her lips between bursts. Around her, sisters fell or advanced, their armor dented, their voices steady. She saw one sister pause to shield a pilgrim who had strayed into the fight, taking a blade meant for the unarmored. She saw another execute a wounded cultist kneeling in surrender. Acts of mercy and acts of cruelty blurred together in the smoke. The fighting drove them deeper into the catacombs. Corridors narrowed, echoes multiplied until it seemed the battle was everywhere at once. Althea's squad broke off to flank an enemy knot near the reliquary vault. She fired, reloaded, fired again. Each recoil jolted through her arms like a confession. Yet even as she fought, she felt the old question gnawing. Was this cleansing or slaughter? Was she guarding the Emperor's light or snuffing out another candle? A flash of movement ahead. A young cultist stumbled from a side passage, weaponless, hands raised. His mask had been torn away, revealing a boy barely older than her novice self. His lips moved, forming a prayer she almost recognized. Althea raised her bolter, finger trembling on the trigger. Time slowed. The servitor choir's hymn deepened into a single mournful note. In her mind she saw the hidden scroll, the sealed windows, the dying candle in her chapel. She lowered the bolter. "Run," she whispered. "Leave this place." The boy's eyes widened. He turned and vanished into the shadows. A bolt shell cracked against the wall beside her. Mirea's voice cut through the smoke. "Hesitation kills." She emerged from an archway, armor spattered with blood, bolter steady. Her eyes blazed, not with fury, but with something colder. Assessment. Althea straightened, heart hammering. He was unarmed. "Unarmed does not mean harmless," Mirea replied. "You spared a test, and you failed it." "A test?" The word tasted of iron. Mirea's smile was thin as a blade. "The Inquisitor wished to know which of us understands necessity. Now he does." She stepped closer until their helmets nearly touched. "Faith is survival, sister. Mercy is vanity." Before Althea could answer, another wave of cultists struck. The two sisters fell back to back, firing into the onrush. Ash swirled like grey snow around them. The servitor's hymn broke into a shriek as one was torn down. Flames from a fallen flamer licked up a mural of a saint, devouring painted wings. Althea's bolter clicked empty. She drew her blade and slashed. Each stroke a prayer turned into steel. Mirea fought like a dancer, efficient and merciless. She executed wounded enemies without pause, her litany a string of clipped syllables. Althea parried a blow meant for her, felt the impact jar her arm to the shoulder. For a moment they were united, loyalty and ambition side by side, faith and survival intertwined. Then a lull. Smoke drifted. The last cultist fell, cut down mid-hymn. Silence returned in a shuddering wave. Only the servitor choir remained, its voices cracked but unbroken, still singing to a god who did not answer. Candles guttered in pools of wax. The catacombs stank of blood and incense. Althea leaned against a pillar, armor dented, breath ragged. Across from her, Mirea reloaded calmly, eyes bright. "You spared an enemy in a war zone," she said, voice almost gentle. "Now you know what that means." Althea wiped her blade on a strip of cloth torn from her robe. "It means I am still human. Humanity is weakness." Mirea slung her bolter. "The Emperor needs instruments, not hearts." Althea met her gaze. "Without hearts we are nothing but servitors." For a heartbeat neither moved. Around them, the catacombs echoed with distant gunfire as other squads finished their battles. Althea felt the duel between them shift, no longer in blades or bolters, but in something deeper, invisible. Loyalty versus ambition, faith versus survival, two paths diverging under the same banner. Mirea broke eye contact first. "We have work to do," she said, turning away. "The Inquisitor expects results." Althea watched her vanish into a side passage, her silhouette framed by extinguished candles. She felt the weight of the Rosarius under her gorget, Sister Varen's gift. She remembered the saint's hymn. Faith without doubt is not fire, but ice. Perhaps mercy was not vanity, but the only ember left. She moved among the fallen, checking for survivors. One cultist still breathed, a girl clutching a relic twisted into a weapon. Althea hesitated, then pressed two fingers to the girl's forehead and whispered a prayer of release before turning away. Her own actions felt neither pure nor guilty, only necessary, a line she chose to draw herself rather than accept from others. The servitor's hymn shifted back into a low drone. Candles sputtered back to life where the air was still. The catacombs smelled of cooling metal and spent devotion. Somewhere deeper in the shrine moon, secrets waited, crates sealed with sigils, doctrines written in ash. Althea knew Maria would lead the way to them, the Inquisitor at her side. She also knew she would follow, not as a pawn, but as a witness, tempered like steel quenched in cold water. She knelt briefly at the shattered altar, placing her hand on the cracked stone. "Emperor," she whispered, "show me what remains when fire is gone." No answer came, only the echo of her voice in the ruined hall. Rising, she joined the other sisters as they regrouped, their armor scorched, their eyes hollow. The canoness spoke of victory, of cleansing complete, but Althea felt no triumph. The battle had not ended anything. It had only deepened the fracture inside her, between the creed she had been taught and the choices she was beginning to make. As they filed out of the catacombs, the servitors continued to sing. Their hymn followed her up the stairs, a thin thread of sound winding through ash and smoke. Choir of the damned, she thought, and wondered which side of the hymn she now stood on. The basilica ship, Sepulchre of Dawn, cut back into real space with a groan like an old cathedral door opening. Beyond the viewports lay Ophelia, 7 once more, red clouds curling over volcanic peaks, shrine spires piercing the sky like black needles. Althea stood at the rail in her battered armor, ash from the shrine moon still clinging to its joints. She had imagined a return bathed in incense and bells. Instead, the world below looked dimmer, as though a film of smoke hung over every holy place. Landing craft bore them to the convent steps. The basalt courtyards where she had marched as a novice were cracked. The banners drooping above the gates were not the ones she remembered. The emperor's golden sigil had been overpainted with a deeper red, and a new motto carved into the lintel: "Only fire endures." As the sisters disembarked, incense vents hissed but released no fragrance, only thin grey vapour that stung the eyes. They moved through familiar corridors now draped with different icons. Candles once left burning in vigil were snuffed, replaced with iron braziers whose smoke filled the air like war camp breath. The reliquary doors stood open, their seals broken. Guards posted in crimson-striped armor Althea did not recognize. The whole convent felt like a body whose organs had been rearranged while it slept. At the central reliquary, she stopped short. The meteoric stone chest she had polished as a novice was shattered, its contents removed. In its place stood a new altar, a slab of obsidian etched with the sigil of the Inquisition. Around it clustered sisters in new colors, armor darkened, pauldrons marked with a stylized flame. Mireia stood at their head. The rival's presence filled the hall like a second dawn. Her armor gleamed black-red, her eyes steady, her voice calm as she recited the litany of purity revised. Gone was the acolyte who whispered under blankets. Here was a leader speaking a creed of iron. The time of softness has ended, she intoned. The emperor demands instruments of fire. Doubt is ice. Mercy is ash. We will endure. Althea's stomach clenched. Around her, sisters she had trained beside knelt to the new altar. Their faces were set but not reluctant, some even luminous with zeal. She felt like a ghost watching her own funeral. Mireia's gaze found her across the reliquary. "Sister Althea," she said, voice smooth, "you return from the shrine moon tempered. Join us." Althea stepped forward, each bootfall echoing. "Tempered," she repeated softly, "or quenched." Her eyes slid to the shattered chest. What was in there? Mireia's smile was thin. "Relics too dangerous for the unready. We have embraced them for the Emperor's sake." no longer hidden, no longer bound. Althea felt the rosarius beads at her throat as if they had turned to ice. The air around the new altar seemed to shimmer, and for a heartbeat she saw something impossible. Saints painted on the frescoes above opening their mouths, but no sound coming out, candles turning to pillars of ash, the galaxy itself kneeling in a chapel without windows. A shiver ran through her, vision, memory, or warning, she could not tell. Sister Varen's hand touched her shoulder, steadying her. The older woman's face was lined, her armor unadorned. "Be careful," she murmured, voice low enough for only Althea to hear. "Prophecy comes like frost. It preserves and it kills." Althea blinked, the vision fading. "I saw," she whispered. "I know." Varen's eyes were sad. "Immortality of spirit may demand the death of everything you love. That is the price they will not speak." In the reliquary hall, Maria continued to preach. She spoke of crusades without end, of saints reforged as weapons, of a creed that would burn doubt from the soul like rot from a wound. Her sisters answered with a new hymn, short, hard syllables like hammer blows. The sound reverberated off the basalt walls until Althea felt it in her teeth. She wanted to shout, to denounce, but her voice stuck. She remembered the boy on the shrine moon whom she had spared, the look in Maria's eyes when she called mercy vanity. She remembered the Inquisitor's rosette on the crate, the pieces aligned, but not into a pattern she could break. It was too large, too deep. She felt as if she were standing inside a sealed reliquary, the air thinning, the candle dying. Later, alone in the old novice's chapel, the one with bricked-up windows, she knelt before the small altar Sister Varen had helped her keep. Dust coated the cloth. The candle she had left there weeks ago was nothing but a stub of cold wax. She closed her eyes and let the vision come again. A galaxy where faith was ash and saints were silent. This time, she did not recoil. She studied it, the way a smith studies a blade under quenching water. Her prayer was no longer a request for certainty, but for clarity. "Show me the cost. Show me the line I must not cross." In the silence that followed, she thought she heard the faintest whisper, perhaps only memory. Sister Varene's voice. "A blade honed too fine cuts the one who wields it." When she rose, the chapel seemed smaller, but her breath steadier. She did not know if she would stand with Maria or against her, but she knew she would not kneel blind. The reliquary of broken vows had been opened, and whatever doctrine emerged from its ashes, she would face it with eyes open. In the main hall, the new hymn rolled on, echoing through corridors where old prayers had once drifted like smoke. Althea stepped out of the chapel and walked toward the sound, beads of her rosarius clicking softly, a heartbeat in her palm. Ophelia Seven's air tasted of iron and incense when Althea stepped out of the shuttle and into the ecclesiarchal district. The sky above the Ministerum's citadel was the same volcanic red as the convent. But the towers here were taller than mountains, their windows latticed with gold. From a distance, the complex looked like a single, unbroken cathedral. Up close, Althea saw the seams, scaffolds clinging to cracked buttresses, saints' statues propped by iron rods, incense burners hanging crooked from chains blackened by fire. Even the steps leading to the throne chamber were worn concave by centuries of pilgrim knees. It was all still grand, but she could feel something underneath, a tremor of decay. Officially, she and her sisters had come to present the relics reclaimed from the shrine moon. Unofficially, she had been sent to assist Mireia, now anointed commander of the Order's purifying flame cadre. The canoness had spoken the words without inflection, but Althea had heard the quiet verdict. Mireia had ascended, and those who hesitated would either follow or be left behind. Yet she also sensed the canoness's unease, as though handing a blade to someone who might cut indiscriminately. Inside, the ministorum smelled of ash, wax, and hidden rot. Long corridors of marble stretched towards shadowed apses. Frescoes of the emperor's triumphs lined the walls, but the paint had begun to flake, curling like burnt paper. Incense burners swung overhead. One broke its chain as Althea passed beneath, shattering on the floor with a hollow clang, scattering coals that hissed against the marble. The sisters with her stepped back instinctively. Althea stooped to pick up a fragment, its heat biting her gauntlet. She looked up and saw a hairline crack running from the ceiling, fresco down through the wall. A sign, or a wound. The ministorum's outer halls were filled with pilgrims, priests, scribes hauling data slates heavy as coffins. But the deeper they went, the emptier it became, until only armored confessors patrolled, their visors blank. Althea felt the press of secrecy closing in. She thought of the reliquary back at the convent, broken vows and new creeds, and felt as though she were walking deeper into the same reliquary, this one built on a planetary scale. Mireia moved ahead with the confidence of someone already initiated. Her armor gleamed, her stride sure. She spoke briefly with a robed official at a sealed door, then gestured for Althea to follow. The door opened onto a private gallery overlooking the grand nave, where thousands of candles burned in long rows. Above them hung the ecclesiarchal throne, a seat of gold perched on a dais of black marble veined with red. It looked eternal from afar. From here, Althea could see the veining was not design, but fractures, hairline cracks creeping like frost. Beautiful, Mireia murmured. Even dying suns still shine. Althea stared at her. Why bring me here? Because you've begun to understand, Mireia said softly. The Imperium survives by becoming what it must. The ministorum bleeds itself dry in wars it cannot win, clinging to relics it cannot protect. The Inquisition offers another path. We will not let the Emperor's light gutter out like a candle. We will make it undying, undying. Althea's voice was low. Or unholy. Mireia's smile held no warmth. Do you still think those are different? Before Althea could answer, a hush fell over the grand nave below. Processional bells rang, their chime fractured as though the clappers were cracked. From the far doors, a column of inquisitorial guards entered, crimson cloaks flowing. Between them walked the same hooded man Althea had glimpsed on the sepulchre of dawn. He carried no weapon visible, but the rosette at his breast glimmered with warp light. The crowd parted like cloth. Priests bowed. Mireia lowered her head in respect, but did not kneel. Althea's heartbeat quickened. Here it was, the secret in daylight. A rogue inquisitor moving openly in the ministorum, and no one stopping him. She looked closer and saw behind him a train of servitors hauling sealed caskets bound in iron chains. The chains rattled faintly as though something inside breathed. The sight brought a flicker of her visions. Saints silent, faith as ash. She gripped the rail to steady herself. Later, in the chambers assigned to their order, she searched for Sister Varenne. The older woman had been quiet all day, watching the proceedings with a look not of fear, but of sorrow. Althea needed her counsel. She found only an empty cell. Varenne's armor was gone, her cot undisturbed. On the stone floor lay a rosarius of jet beads, Varenne's, its chain dark with blood that had not yet dried. Althea knelt, touching the beads with gloved fingers. A shudder ran through her, half vision, half memory. Varenne standing at the edge of a void, a candle in her hand, whispering, A blade honed too fine cuts the one who wields it. The image dissolved, leaving only the rosarius slick in her palm. She looked up and saw the cell's narrow window had been sealed with a slab of iron, as if to keep something out or in. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Maria in the doorway, the hooded inquisitor at her side. His presence filled the room like cold water. "Your mentor has been reassigned," Maria said softly. She chose to leave rather than join the new order. Althea rose slowly, beads clutched tight. "Where is she?" "That is not your concern," the Inquisitor said. His voice was smooth, almost kind. "The old ways are dying. We are building something that cannot die." Althea met his gaze. "What price will it demand?" He smiled faintly. "All great works demand sacrifice." Maria stepped closer. "Come with us, Althea. You've seen the cracks. You've felt the visions. You know the Imperium cannot survive as it is." Althea's fingers dug into the rosarius until she felt the beads bite her palm. She thought of the sealed windows, the falling incense burner, the cracking marble of the throne. She thought of Varen's candle stub in the hidden chapel, and she thought of the boy she had spared in the catacombs, running into shadow. There was still a line she could not cross, though she did not yet know how to defend it. She turned away without answering. Outside, bells rang again, each tone slightly off as if the metal itself were fatigued. Dust drifted from the ceiling frescoes. Incense smoke curled downward like dark water. Somewhere beyond the sealed corridors, Sister Varen was gone, leaving only beads and blood. Althea slipped the rosarius into her gorget, its weight like a heartbeat against her throat. She knew now the struggle was not only on battlefields, but at the heart of the Imperium itself, a war of creeds where loyalty and survival blurred, and she knew the next choice she made might decide which flame endured. The silent chapel rose out of the ash plains like a black tooth. Once it had been a pilgrim refuge on the edge of the ecclesiastical district, a place where novitiates took vows of humility and wandering priests prayed for forgotten souls. Now its windows were sealed with iron, its bells silenced, its spires braced by gun emplacements. Servitor turrets tracked the horizon, their muzzles glowing faintly in the volcanic dusk. In the long shadow of the Ministerum's cracked throne, the chapel had become a fortress. Althea stood at the lip of a trench cut into the ash. Around her knelt a handful of sisters, still loyal to the old creed. Their armor was scuffed, their banners torn, but their eyes held the quiet steadiness of those who had chosen exile rather than obedience. They had followed her without orders when she whispered of Varen's disappearance and the blood-stained rosarius. They knew the rescue was unauthorized. They also knew some vows outweighed commands. The wind off the ash plains smelled of burnt incense. In the distance, the chapel's braziers hissed like serpents. Althea closed her eyes and breathed, feeling the rosarius beads against her gorget. Each bead was a heartbeat, each heartbeat a question. Could she save Varen without damning herself? Could she spill a sister's blood and still call it service? Doubt had become a constant companion, but so had a strange clarity. She whispered a prayer that was neither from the hymnals nor the new doctrine, a prayer shaped like steel. "Let me act with open eyes." She raised her hand. The loyal sisters moved forward, not in a charge, but in a slow procession, bolters held like reliquaries. Each step was measured, each footfall an invocation. They advanced across the ash plain toward the chapel's sealed gates, their silhouettes lit by the dying sun. From afar, they might have looked like pilgrims approaching a shrine. Only the set of their shoulders revealed them as soldiers. The first salvo from the fortress chapel fell like a tolling bell. Shells struck the ash, throwing up grey fountains. Vox static hissed in Althea's ear, resolving into a voice she knew too well. Althea. Morea's tone was almost tender. Turn back. This place is consecrated. What you seek cannot be saved. Althea pressed her thumb to the Vox rune. Where is she? A soft laugh. Already beyond your reach. You cling to ashes. She taught us to question, Althea said. That is not ash. She taught you to hesitate. And hesitation kills. The Vox clicked off. The sisters reached the outer wall. Althea signaled, and a melter breach flared, cutting a hole through ferrocrete like wax under a candle. Smoke rolled out, carrying the scent of scorched parchment. They stepped inside. Within, the silent chapel still bore traces of its old purpose. Murals of saints lined the nave, but bullet impacts pocked their halos. Candles had been replaced by electric lumens that flickered like nervous eyes. Each footstep echoed like a confession in an empty confessional. Althea's bolter felt heavy in her hands, less a weapon than a censer trailing smoke. Resistance came in bursts, sisters in crimson-striped armor moving from cover to cover, chanting the new litany as they fired. Bolter rounds cracked against pillars carved with prayers. Althea's band answered in kind, but their hymns were low and mournful, each shot a plea for forgiveness. One of her sisters fell, a bolt through the gorget. She slid down a fresco of St. Catherine, leaving a smear of blood over painted wings. Althea whispered the release prayer before moving on. They fought their way down a side passage toward the reliquary cells. Althea kept her vox tuned, and Morea's voice came intermittently, half-truths and promises, like incense smoke drifting through cracked windows. She chose this, Morea murmured once. She saw what we're building. She understood another time. You can still join me. No more doubts. No more dying sons, Althea did not answer. Each time she heard the voice, she felt her heart tighten, not with hatred, but with memory. Two novices scrubbing basalt floors together, a shard of forbidden glass under a blanket, a whispered question about saints. They had once been sisters in more than name. Could she kill that, even now? At the inner sanctum, they found the first reliquary cell. Chains hung from the ceiling, like black vines. The floor was slick with something darker than oil. Althea's boot nudged a rosarius bead, jet, identical to the ones Varen had carried. She stooped to pick it up. The bead was warm. She closed her fist around it and felt a tremor pass through her, a flicker of Varen's voice. A blade honed too fine cuts the one who wields it. Gunfire erupted from the choir loft above. Two of her sisters went down before she spotted the shooters. Loyalists turned purifying flame cadre, their faces hidden behind blank visors. Althea's band returned fire, but she held her shots a heartbeat longer than necessary, seeking only to suppress. She saw one opponent stumble, armor cracked, hands raised. For an instant she hesitated, bolter leveled. Could she kill a sister to save the order? The moment stretched like a drawn breath. She saw Morea's eyes in her mind, polished. Iron. She saw the boy she had spared in the catacombs. She saw Varen's candle stub, its flame guttering, but not gone. She lowered the bolter. The sister dropped her weapon and fled into the shadows. Another loyalist fired after her but missed. Althea's heart pounded. She had chosen again, and again she did not know if it was faith or folly. They pressed onward. The chapel's nave narrowed into a stairwell spiraling down. The walls sweated condensation that smelled of metal and old incense. Symbols of cracking marble followed them. Pillars split, icons fallen from niches. It was as though the building itself bore witness to their fracture. At the stairs' bottom, a heavy door stood ajar. Beyond it lay a chamber, lit by a single swinging lamp. Chains dangled from the ceiling. A cot sat in the center, sheets rumpled, empty. On the pillow lay a rosarius of jet beads, the last of Varen's, its chains soaked in blood that had not yet dried. Althea approached slowly. Her gauntlet hovered above the beads but did not touch. Around her the air felt cold, as if the chapel were holding its breath. She closed her eyes and saw again her vision from Ophelia 7, saints opening their mouths, but no sound coming out, candles turning to ash. This time the vision did not fade when she opened her eyes. It lay over the room like a transparent veil, the lamp flickering, the chains swaying, the beads glimmering like drops of night. The vox runa crackled. Mirea's voice, "You're too late. She is with the Inquisitor now. You cannot unmake what we are building." Althea's hand closed around the rosarius at her throat. Her own voice was steady. "If you have taken her, I will find her. Will you?" Mirea's tone softened, almost a whisper. "Or will you become her?" Static swallowed the channel. Althea stood in the empty chamber, her sisters forming a silent circle around her. None spoke. They could all feel it. The end of one path, the edge of another. Althea lifted the blood-stained rosarius from the pillow and held it up. Wax dripped from the swinging lamp like slow tears. Outside, the fortress chapel groaned as though under strain. Somewhere above, more incense burners fell from their chains and shattered, scattering coals across marble. Ash drifted down the stairwell like grey snow. Althea turned to her sisters. "We are leaving," she said softly, "but this is not finished." They retraced their steps through the ruined nave, carrying the beads like a relic. The servitor turrets were silent now, their optics dimmed. Candles flickered weakly in niches, some extinguished, some clinging to life. Each footfall echoed like a prayer left unanswered. At the threshold, Althea looked back once. The silent chapel loomed against the dying sun, its spires cracked, its windows sealed. Somewhere inside, Mirea's doctrine was taking root, fed by secrecy and blood. But Althea felt no despair, only resolve, sharpened like a blade, tempered like steel quenched in cold water. She would find Varen. She would face Mirea, and she would decide for herself what it meant to be faithful in a galaxy of ash. She stepped out onto the ash plain. The wind caught her banner, tattered but still bearing the old sigil. Her loyal sisters followed, their silhouettes dark against the volcanic glow. Above them the sky cracked with distant thunder, a sound like bells breaking. Each step away from the chapel felt heavier, yet also truer, as if she were walking out of a reliquary and into open air. In her palm, the rosarius beads were still warm. The relic had been taken from a secret vault beneath the silent chapel, wrapped in black cloth and bound with sigils that flickered faintly like dying coals. No record named it, no priest dared to claim it. Althea carried it herself on the return to their hidden refuge, the weight of it pressing into her gauntlets as though it were not metal, but a living thing trying to slow her steps. Even wrapped, she could feel a pulse under the cloth, sometimes steady, sometimes erratic, as if it listened to her heartbeat and tried to answer. Her loyal sisters refused to touch it. They built a small oratory out of scavenged stones in a cavern far below the city's catacombs, sealing the door with melted wax and whispered prayers. Althea placed the relic on the altar herself. When she unwrapped it, she found an icon of a saint she did not recognize, carved from some dark mineral shot through with pale veins. The saint's face was worn smooth by centuries of kisses, yet the eyes seemed to glimmer faintly as though wet. A crack ran from the crown of its head down through its heart, splitting the carving like a wound. Around the base pooled dried wax that smelled faintly of salt and ash. For 3 days she prayed before it, rosarious beads slipping through her fingers, trying to draw meaning from its silence. Outside the cavern, Ministorum patrols searched for them. Inside, time felt suspended. Candles burned low, their flames thin and blue. Her sisters whispered among themselves, some fearful, some reverent. Althea did not tell them about the faint warmth she felt when she laid her palm on the icon's cracked surface, or the way its stone seemed to vibrate just before she fell asleep. On the 4th night, the dreams began. She dreamed of a hall of endless mirrors, each reflecting not her face but her armor, row upon row of sisters marching without end. Their eyes were empty hollows, their voices a single monotone hymn that never paused for breath. She reached out to one and found only a shell of bone and metal. When she turned, the hall dissolved into a battlefield under a black sun. Candles toppled and turned to pillars of ash. Saints carved in marble wept blood down their cheeks and opened their mouths, but no sound emerged. Above it all loomed the cracked icon from her altar, enormous now, whispering words she could not understand. She woke with a start, heart hammering. The cavern was silent, save for the soft hiss of candle wicks. The icon sat on the altar as before, but its eyes seemed brighter, as though polished overnight. She reached out and touched it. The stone was warm. That day she told Sister Carentia, her second in command, that she was unwell. Carentia only nodded. "We all are," she said. "This hiding eats at us." She did not ask about the icon. That night, the dreams returned. This time she stood on the deck of a warship built entirely from reliquaries, its hull studded with bones. An endless crusade spread before her, worlds burning, shrines rising and falling like tides. She saw herself at the ship's prow, face hidden behind a mask of iron, her rosarious beads fused into a chain for a weapon. Mireia walked beside her, eyes like polished mirrors, but no words passed between them. Behind them marched an army of sisters, who were neither alive nor dead, their steps silent, their faith hollow but unending. The cracked icon whispered again, closer now, almost clear. Not enough. Never enough. She woke, trembling, the rosarius biting her palm. The candles in the cavern had burned themselves into puddles of wax that glowed faintly green. The icon's crack seemed wider, as if the stone had shifted. For a moment, she thought she heard a sigh. On the 7th night, she stopped resisting. She knelt before the icon and pressed her forehead to its base. "What are you?" she whispered. "What do you want from me?" The stone was warm, almost soft. In her mind the voice came, not as words, but as a current pulling at her. "You are a blade in forging, a test, a vessel. Choose." Images flared behind her closed eyes. The boy she had spared in the catacombs, the sister she had let flee in the silent chapel, Mireia's voice on the vox, Varen's candle, all of it weaving into a single pattern she could not quite see, like a tapestry glimpsed from too close. For the first time she wondered if she had ever been choosing freely, or if every step, every doubt, every act of mercy had been part of a trial arranged by forces beyond mortal comprehension. A test not of obedience, but of something deeper, older, waiting to be proved. She drew back, gasping. The cavern's air felt thin, her sister's murmurs distant. The icon stared at her with eyes that now clearly glistened, as though tears of stone had welled and frozen. Around its base, the wax puddles had hardened into shapes like tiny skulls. Carentia approached. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. "Your eyes look like hers." She meant Mireia. Althea only shook her head. "This relic," she began, then stopped. What could she say? That it spoke? That it showed her futures she could not bear? That she might be walking a path drawn for her by hands she could not see? That night she dreamed not of battles, but of a vast library, its shelves filled with icons of every sister who had ever lived. Each icon cracked down the center, whispering, filled the aisles, a susurrus of prayers and accusations. At the library's heart stood Mireia, cloaked and hooded like the Inquisitor, holding out her hand. In her palm glowed a single bead of jet. When Althea reached for it, it turned to ash. She woke with a cry. Her sisters rushed to her, but she waved them off. She sat before the icon until dawn, watching wax drip and harden. The saint's face now seemed almost hers. Same tilt of the chin, same hollow eyes. She wondered if it had always been so, or if the stone had changed, or she had. By the 10th night, she no longer needed to sleep to hear it. In waking hours, she felt the whisper under her skin, a pulse matching her own. It did not command. It offered glimpses, endless crusades, hollow faith, immortal shells, and each glimpse carried a question. Would she accept this future or defy it? Could she even tell the difference? She began keeping her rosarius beads in her bare palm as she prayed, letting the stone bite her skin until it left marks. Pain anchored her. She spoke less to her sisters, retreating inward. When Carentia asked what their next move would be, Althea answered only, "Wait, watch." She felt herself suspended like steel above water, unsure whether the plunge would temper or shatter her. The cavern changed with her. Candles burned lower, their flames shrinking to pinpricks. Statues they had brought from the convent wept wax from their eyes, streaks of pale tear trails down black stone cheeks. The air grew colder, even as the icon grew warm. Some sisters began to whisper that the relic was cursed. Others said it was a test of purity. All looked to Althea, and she could offer nothing but silence. One evening, she caught her own reflection in a shard of polished metal. For an instant, she did not recognize herself. Eyes shadowed, lips moving in a whisper she had not meant to speak. The icon's words echoed in her mind. A vessel, a test. She remembered Sister Varen's warning about immortality of spirit, demanding the death of all she loved. Perhaps the death had already begun, not of bodies, but of certainties. She rose and draped a cloth over the icon, but even through the fabric she felt its warmth. "If I am a pawn," she murmured, "then show me the board." No answer came, only the drip of wax and the faint scent of salt. She wondered if Mireia dreamed of the same hall of mirrors, the same endless march, or if she had already chosen and ceased to dream at all. Outside the cavern, thunder rolled through the catacombs like distant bells breaking. Patrols drew closer. The ministorum whispered of purges. Althea tightened her armor straps and pressed the rosarius to her lips. She felt the bead's edge cut her skin, a tiny drop of blood like a signature. That night she did not dream. She sat awake, watching the cloth over the icon rise and fall as if breathing. In the silence she understood one thing clearly. Whatever force moved behind the veil was not done with her, and she was not done with it. Candles guttered, statues wept. In the cavern's thin air, the whisper grew fainter but deeper, like a tide retreating before a storm. The frozen hive world of Asterion 7 lay beneath a bruised sky, its spires rising like blackened ribs through fields of perpetual frost. Pilgrim trains wound through canyons of ice toward shrines carved into the hive's foundations, their tracks a glint of steel under drifting snow. In the thin atmosphere, even the wind sounded muted, as if the world were smothering its own cries. Althea stepped from the transport onto ground that cracked under her boots, her breath a plume of white. Snow drifted around her, darkened by industrial ash, each flake landing on bolter casings like a dying prayer. The order had come to purify a rebellion that had broken out among the hive's lower levels. Officially, they were to defend a relic shrine at the city's heart. Unofficially, Althea suspected it was another step in Mirea's ascent, another theatre for her harsher creed. For weeks their ships had orbited the planet, dropping sister cadres into the ice-strewn manufactoria, hymns blaring from vox towers. The rebels called themselves penitents and fought with stolen weapons and fragments of scripture. The order called them heretics and burned their banners. Between those flames walked Althea, her rosarius hidden under armor, her doubts like coals beneath ash. Battle on Asterion 7 was not like the catacombs or the convent. Here the cold swallowed sound. Flamers hissed and bolters roared, but the snow muffled them into a distant thunder. Sisters advanced through avenues of frozen statues. Workers caught mid-strike when a chemical spill had flash-froze them decades ago, carving their way toward a central plaza where a shard of some forgotten saint lay encased in ice. The relic had become a rallying point for both sides. To one, it promised absolution, to the other, proof of sin. Althea led a small formation through a breach in the hive wall. Frost coated the inside like white mold. Her boots left tracks that filled instantly with black snow. Each breath rasped through her vox mask. She could feel her sister's eyes on her, searching for resolve. She gave orders in a low voice. Not the bark of command, but a prayer in motion. Every movement felt ritualistic, checking a corner, lifting a bolter, touching the beads inside her gauntlet, as if she were performing a liturgy rather than a sweep. On the third day of fighting, Mireia arrived at the front lines. She came in full regalia, her armor lacquered black-red, her pauldrons marked with the flame's sigil. An inquisitorial retinue followed, their cloaks bright against the ash snow. She did not come quietly. Loudspeakers blared her revised litany across the plaza. Pilgrims knelt, rebels jeered, sisters stared. The air around her seemed to sharpen. Althea was summoned to the center of the square. Thousands of believers, pilgrims, indentured workers, even captured rebels, were herded into makeshift stands carved from ice blocks. The relic shard glimmered at the plaza's heart, its ice casing black with soot. Snow fell steadily, flecked with ash, coating bolter casings and banners alike. Mireia's voice rang out over the vox amplifiers. "Sister Althea stands accused of heresy," she declared. "Heresy of mercy, heresy of doubt, heresy of sparing the unclean." The crowd murmured, a low susurrus-like wind through cracks. Althea felt their eyes on her, cold and hot at once. She wanted to protest, to shout that it was Mireia who had bartered with the Inquisitor, Mireia who had shattered the reliquary, Mireia who had led them to this frozen theatre. But the words died in her throat. She thought of the boy she had spared, the sister she had let flee. She thought of the whispering icon, of endless crusades and hollow shells. Was this not what it had warned her of, becoming a test rather than a player? "The Emperor does not suffer ice in his flame," Mireia intoned. "Let her prove her purity before his eyes and before yours." Trial by ordeal. A roar rose from the stands, some in zeal, some in confusion. Snow thickened, swirling like a blizzard of ash. Althea's sisters were dragged aside, weapons confiscated. She stood alone before the relic shard, the crowd a ring of shadows. In the center, a pit had been carved in the ice, its bottom filled with freezing water dark as oil. Two bolters rested on a dais nearby, each marked with a sigil of judgment, one loaded with sanctified rounds, one with blanks. She was to choose one, step into the pit, and fire at a target bearing the Emperor's sigil. If her faith was true, the shot would strike and she would survive. If not, the water and the crowd would finish what Maria had begun. She removed her helmet slowly. The cold bit her skin, 1,000 needles. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. In that moment she felt stripped of armor and rank, reduced to a single heartbeat. Faith without doubt is not fire, but ice. The phrase rose unbidden. She stepped into the pit. Freezing water closed around her to the waist, stealing her breath. She reached for the first bolter. Her fingers were numb. The metal burned like frost. Around her the crowd murmured prayers, some for her death, some for her salvation. Above them, Maria watched, expression unreadable, vox mask hiding her mouth, but not her eyes. Althea thought she saw the faintest flicker of hope or calculation. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer not from any book. Emperor, I do not ask for a sign. Only let me act with open eyes. She opened them and chose the bolter whose weight felt truest, not heaviest. She raised it toward the target, a carved wooden sigil of the Emperor, scorched black at the edges. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The shot cracked like a breaking seal. A sanctified round flew true, shattering the target. Steam burst from the impact. The crowd gasped. The pit's water surged around her but did not drag her down. Snow swirled above like a halo of black feathers. She lowered the bolter, breath ragged. She had not asked for proof, yet proof had come. Not of her innocence, but of her path. She understood now that the ordeal was not Maria's test, but the icon's. Extended into waking life, she was being forged, tempered. Each act of mercy had been a hammer stroke, each accusation a plunge into cold water. She was no longer the novice on basalt cloisters. She was steel in the quench. Maria descended from the dais. The crowd parted. She stopped at the pit's edge, looking down at Althea. So be it, she said softly. Vox amplifiers muted now. You live. But you are changed. Althea met her gaze. So are you. For a moment, something passed between them. Memory of nights whispering under blankets, of Sister Varen's quiet hand on their shoulders, of the path they might have walked together. Then it was gone. Mireia turned sharply and gestured to her retinue. Release her, she ordered. The Emperor has judged. Hands hauled Althea from the pit. Her armor dripped freezing water, steam rising as it hit the cold air. The crowd's murmurs swelled into a chant, some hailing her as vindicated, others spitting curses. Snow continued to fall, black and silent. Each flake landed on her bolter, her gauntlet, her face, and melted into nothing. She felt despair still, but under it a new clarity. She was not simply surviving Maria's tests. She was stepping out of them into something larger. Later, alone in a makeshift cell, she wrung the water from her rosarius beads and laid them on the table. The icon's whisper echoed faintly in her mind, no longer threatening, but waiting. A vessel, a test. She pressed her palm to the beads until they left imprints in her skin. Snowflakes drifted through a crack in the wall, landing on the table like grey tears. She whispered, "Not a pawn. Not yet." Outside the hive's bells tolled, their tones fractured like everything else in the Imperium. The black snow fell thicker, covering banners, bolter casings, even the relic shard in the plaza. each flake a dying prayer, each prayer a spark waiting for breath. The storms came first. They rolled across Ophelia Seven's sky like bruises blooming, clouds veined with lightning that flickered sickly green through volcanic ash. Bells tolled out of rhythm from the Ministorum towers, their tones warped by the wind. Althea watched from a balcony, high above the city, the cracked marble under her boots shifting as tremors shook the spire. In the distance she could see the great cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, lit by storm fire, their stained glass shattering and falling like coloured rain. Each spire toppled in slow motion, prayers breaking apart with the stone. Inside, the Order of the Purifying Flame had gathered under Mirea's banners, preparing for a conclave. Rumours ran through the corridors. The Inquisition would name a new crusade. The Emperor's light would be reforged. Althea walked among them unseen, still marked by her trial, but not yet claimed by either side. She felt the rosarius beads at her throat. Sister Varen's blood still dried into the chain. Each bead a question, each question a heartbeat. A message had reached her 2 nights before, slipped under her door without seal or sender. Only 3 words: meet me, alone. The coordinates pointed to a derelict cathedral on the city's edge, its roof long collapsed, its altars blackened by fire. She had gone at midnight, moving through alleys where ash fell like soft snow. The cathedral's doors hung open, saints' statues toppled in the nave. Lightning flashed through the empty windows, casting the interior in storm-lit fragments. And there, in the apse where the altar once stood, waited Sister Varen. She wore no armor. A crimson cloak draped her shoulders, the rosette of the Inquisition pinned to her chest. Her eyes were the same, steady, kind, but lined deeper with something like sorrow. In the flicker of stormlight, she looked at once like a confessor and an executioner. Althea stopped halfway down the nave, heart hammering. "You're alive," she whispered. "I am," Varen said softly. "And so are you, though you should not be." Althea's fingers clenched the rosarius. "You're one of them. I was always one of them." Varen's voice carried easily over the wind. "From the day I entered the Order, I served the Inquisition as well. We planted ourselves in convents, trained alongside true sisters, waited for the right souls to emerge. You and Mireia were chosen before you could walk, not by the Emperor. By us, Althea's breath caught. Lightning flared, throwing Vareni's shadow long across the broken floor. Why? To craft what the Imperium has never had, Varen said. The perfect martyr. A saint not by miracle, but by design. A faith that can survive even when the truth is known. We needed 2, one to rise in fire, one to endure in doubt. We did not know which you would become." The words fell like stones into Althea's mind, displacing everything she had built. She saw again the Hall of Mirrors from her dreams, the endless march of hollow sisters, the cracked icon whispering. She felt the pulse of it under her skin. "You used us," she said. Varen lowered her gaze. "We forged you, and you forged yourself. Every mercy you showed, every hesitation, every act of defiance, we recorded them all. The Inquisitor called them tests. I called them prayers. The Emperor's light must have vessels. We tried to make one." Althea's voice was a whisper. "And Mireia?" "She embraced the plan. She believes in it still, but she thinks she can control the outcome. She cannot thunder cracked above, rattling the broken windows." The cathedral trembled, a fragment of marble falling from the ceiling to shatter at Althea's feet. Outside, another spire toppled, its bells tolling as they fell. "Why tell me this now?" she asked. Because the final step is at hand, Verena said. The Inquisitor will declare a crusade that will consume this sector. Mireia will stand as its flame. You will be offered up as its spark, accused, condemned, martyred. The faith of billions will be rekindled by your death. The Emperor's will, so they claim, will be served. But it is not his will. It is ours. Althea's knees weakened. She reached for a pillar to steady herself, its carved saint weeping rainwater down its face like tears. If I expose this, if I tell them the truth, the faith of billions shatters, Varen finished. Without it, the Imperium collapses faster than any war could bring. Worlds burn, entire sectors lost. Your mercy saves no one, another lightning flash. In that instant, Althea saw Vereni not as a mentor, but as a woman who had spent centuries as a knife in the dark, cutting away pieces of her own soul for a cause she no longer believed. And if I stay silent, then the plan continues. You die, they live. Mireia rises. Veren's eyes shone wet. It was always your choice. That is the only part we could not design. Althea's mind spun, cracked marble, falling incense burners, candles turning to ash. She had prayed for clarity, and here it was, a blade in her hand, edged toward herself. She thought of Maria on the Vox, whispering half-truths. She thought of the boy she had spared, the sister she had let flee. She thought of the icon's whisper, a vessel, a test. She saw now the board on which she had been moved. Varen stepped closer, holding out her hand. Come with me, she said. We can end it differently, but you must decide now. A deep rumble shook the cathedral. Outside, the Ministerum's bells clanged discordant as another tower cracked down its middle, sending a plume of dust into the storm-lit sky. The nave filled with falling plaster and swirling ash. Through it, Althea saw figures approaching, sisters of the purifying flame, their armor gleaming black-red, weapons ready. Mireia at their head. She knows you're here, Verene said. She's come to finish the forging. Althea looked at her mentor's outstretched hand. Blood stained Verene's fingers, where the rosarius beads had bitten into her skin. You said it's my choice, Althea whispered. But either path destroys something. Yes, Verene said. That is what martyrdom means. The cathedral doors slammed open. Wind and ash roared in, extinguishing the last candles. Mireia's voice rang out, amplified by Vox. Sister Althea, you stand accused once more. Surrender and be purified. Althea's rosarius beads clicked softly in her palm. Around her cracked saints wept, stormlight flashing in their tears. She felt despair like a pit opening, but under it a fierce stillness. She had spent her life believing choices were between mercy and survival, doubt and obedience. Now she saw the third path, to choose with eyes open, even if the choice burned everything. She turned to speak to Varen, but found the apse empty. Only the crimson cloak lay on the floor, the rosette of the Inquisition pinned to it. No sign of her mentor, vanished like smoke. Atop the cloak lay another rosarius, its beads black as night, the chain slick with fresh blood. Althea knelt, fingers closing around it. The storm howled through the cathedral, making the saints seem to wail. Mireia's voice echoed again, closer now. Althea, decide. Althea rose, cloak whipping around her in the wind, 2 rosary in her hands, one her own, one Varen's. Above her the roof split under a bolt of green lightning, the sky opening like a wound. She felt the cracked icon whisper deep inside her skull. Choose. She stepped out from the shadows into the nave, stormlight wrapping her in pale fire. Her sisters of doubt and her sisters of flame faced each other across the broken floor. Between them Althea walked, each footstep echoing like a bell tolling for the dead, a litany of treachery spoken not in words, but in the weight of what she carried. The city of Ophelia, 7, had become a labyrinth of ash when Althea began her march. Spires burned like torches against a sulphur sky, their bells tolling without rhythm as cracks split their foundations. Storms rolled between the towers, green lightning forking across stained glass before shattering it into glittering rain. Each step toward the rival's stronghold was a step through a graveyard of faith. She led her sisters in silence at first, but the silence felt too much like surrender. Then, one by one, voices rose, a hymn not of victory, but of witness. The sound drifted over the ruined avenues like smoke, low and mournful, a procession of ghosts still breathing. They called it the March of the Faithful Dead, though none of them had spoken the name aloud. Armor dented, banners ragged, bolters heavy in their hands. They moved through corridors of toppled saints and flickering votive lamps. The hymn became their heartbeat. Althea walked at the head, the rosarius beads clutched under her gorget like a pulse against her throat. She no longer prayed for triumph. She prayed only to be seen by the Emperor, by the billions who would never know their names, by herself. The rival's stronghold loomed at the city's heart, a cathedral refitted into a fortress, its windows sealed with iron, its towers bristling with autocannons. Flames leapt from the nave's broken roof, casting the sky in orange and green. Along the steps knelt converts to the purifying flame, faces hidden behind visored masks, hands pressed to weapons like rosaries. As Althea's procession approached, they did not fire. They simply bowed their heads, whispering litanies of cleansing. The path opened like a wound. Althea's boots crunched over shattered marble as she led her sisters up the steps. Snow mixed with ash fell from the open roof, black and white flakes spiraling together before vanishing on hot stone. Each flake felt to her like a dying prayer, brief, silent, uncounted. She thought of the boy she had spared, the sister she had let flee, the trial by ordeal, the whispering icon. All the hammer strikes of her life forging her toward this moment. Inside, the nave burned. Fire climbed the columns like ivy, devouring banners, curling frescoes into blackened scrolls. Smoke hung in veils that parted as she walked, revealing visions at their edges, flickers of herself crowned with iron, a mask over her face, her body gilded and hollow. She saw herself marching at the head of an endless army of sisters without eyes, their hymns unbroken, their hearts stilled, immortal, unchanging, a saint carved from stone. The sight filled her not with awe, but with dread. She recoiled, blinking hard until the vision faded. Her knees wanted to buckle. She kept walking. Her loyalists felt it too. Some faltered mid-hymn, voices breaking. Others pressed on, tears streaking soot on their cheeks. The hymn changed subtly, less a march now than a lament. The sound echoed from the burning arches, as if sung by the building itself. At the nave's far end, on a dais where the main altar had stood, Mireia waited. She no longer looked entirely human. Her armor had fused to her skin at the edges, lines of silver etched into her face like veins of molten metal. Her eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with depthless reflection, as though they looked out from a mirror. The Inquisitor stood behind her like a shadow, hands clasped, smile faint. Mireia raised a hand, and the chanting of her converts ceased. The flames bent away from her like supplicants. "You came," she said, voice carrying easily over the crackle. "Even after everything, Althea stopped halfway down the nave. I came, she said, her voice low but steady. Not for victory. Maria tilted her head. Then for what? For witness. The nave groaned as a beam collapsed, sending sparks in a wide arc. Snow and ash drifted down through the hole in the roof, hissing as they met the flames. The two sisters stared at each other across the burning hall. Behind Althea, her loyalists formed a ragged line, bolters lowered. Behind Mireia, the converts knelt, heads bowed, weapons untouched. For a heartbeat, it felt less like a battle than a liturgy whose last verse had yet to be sung. You saw it, didn't you? Mireia's voice softened. The visions, the immortality, the army of saints. I saw, Althea admitted, and I recoiled. You fear what you're meant to be? Mireia stepped down from the dais, flames curling around her boots without burning. I embrace it. I will lead them beyond flesh, beyond doubt. You were always meant to follow or fall, Althea's Rosarius. Shoot beads clicked softly. You've become something less than human. Less than mortal, Mireia corrected. More than human. Faith incarnate Althea shook her head. Faith without doubt is not fire, but ice. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mireia's eyes flickered, recognition of a memory long buried. That old scrap, she said, almost a laugh. We were children. We still are, Althea said quietly. Children playing with relics we don't understand. Another beam crashed, scattering sparks across the nave. Flames rose higher, painting saints on the walls in shades of crimson and black. Althea felt the cracked icons whisper deep inside her skull. A vessel. A test. She realized the test was no longer about mercy or survival. It was about what she would do, standing here, eyes open, at the edge of martyrdom. Her loyalists shifted behind her, waiting for a signal. She gave none. She looked at Mireia and felt both love and grief. A bond that had begun on basalt cloisters now stretched to breaking across a burning nave. She wondered if Mireia saw the same vision she did. Two girls kneeling side by side, one reaching for a shard of forbidden glass, the other clutching a rosarius. Did Mireia remember Sister Varenen's hand on their shoulders? The promise that faith could be fire or cage? Mireia extended a hand. Join me, she said. We can end this together. Become what we were meant to be. Althea did not move. The hymn behind her had faded to a hum. Snow and ash fell steadily through the burning roof, landing on bolter casings like silent benediction. Each flake melted instantly, leaving nothing. She felt despair rise, but under it a strange peace. She had prayed for clarity, and it had come. She would not be carved into a hollow saint. She would not burn doubt from her soul like rot from a wound. She would carry it, even if it broke her. The nave's flames surged, casting long shadows. The Inquisitor stepped forward, opening his mouth to speak, but Althea raised a hand and the sound died. Her voice was calm. I came to witness. Now I do. She took one step closer, then another, until she and Mireia stood at opposite ends of the altar space, flames between them. Neither raised a weapon. The building groaned like a living thing, its cracked spires trembling in the storm. Outside, bells tolled out of time, their tones splintered. The two sisters faced each other across the burning nave, one with eyes like mirrors, one with eyes ringed in ash. Behind them, their followers knelt, hymns held in their throats. Between them, snow and ash swirled like black feathers caught in an updraft, falling, rising, falling again. Althea felt the cracked icon whisper once more, not a command but a question. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat and opened them again. Whatever happened next would not be trial or test. It would be choice. The air inside the nave hung heavy, a mixture of smoke, ash, and the faint metallic tang of spilled oil. Outside, the storm continued its slow rhythm, green lightning, distant thunder, and the hiss of frozen rain against shattered masonry. But inside, time itself seemed to dilate. Every footstep, every inhalation, every flutter of a flame in the altar's remains moved in a drawn-out eternity, as though the universe had folded in upon itself to witness the trial that was about to unfold. Althea tightened her grip on the rosarius, feeling the worn beads press into her palms, each one a memory of vows whispered under volcanic ceilings, of prayers that had burned longer than any star, of a faith tested against the cold void. Behind her, the loyal sisters crouched, weapons lowered, eyes wide, silent. They did not dare breathe too loudly. Even a whisper seemed sacrilegious in this cathedral of fire and judgment. Mireia stood at the opposite end, still more than human, less than mortal. Her armor hummed faintly, each joint a conduit for some alien energy that Althea could neither name nor resist acknowledging. Her eyes, once familiar, now reflected not the flicker of candlelight, but the infinite horizon of ambition and cold eternity. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if her every step had been choreographed by centuries of predestination. "You came," Mireia said, voice rich with mock reverence, "to challenge what you could never understand. And yet, here you are." "I came to witness," Althea replied softly, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Not to fight, not to prove myself. I came to bear witness." Mireia tilted her head, considering. A faint smile flickered, like a dying candle. "Witness? Is that all you are now? A spectator at the edge of eternity?" "I bear witness," Althea said again, louder this time, letting the words ring against the cracked walls. "I see you for what you've become, and I see myself for what I must endure. That is enough." The rival's smile widened, and with it came a sound that made Althea's spine tremble. It was the soft, metallic clang of chains, slowly falling from some unseen altar above. A note struck in a discordant litany. The sound multiplied, echoing through the nave in slow motion, each clang stretching into eternity. The sisters flinched, but Althea's eyes stayed locked on Mireia. "You speak of endurance," Mireia said, stepping forward. "But endurance is not enough. To survive, to shape the universe, one must shed mercy, shred doubt, and embrace what lies beyond flesh. Do you hear it, Althea? The eternal rhythm?" Althea felt the vibration in her chest, as if the very nave were breathing through her body. Her heartbeats had slowed, each one a deliberate drum, each one echoing in the hollow cavity of her chest. She closed her eyes, centering herself in the eye of this storm. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one within. She felt her faith, the one that had wavered, faltered, and been scorched in trials of fire and silence, solidify into something quieter, more dangerous. Acceptance. Acceptance of loss. Acceptance of what she could not control, what she could not save, and what she would never reclaim. The chains fell again, slower this time, each link spiraling through the air like frozen prayer beads. Althea opened her eyes to see them strike the floor, sending sparks into the blackened snow that had drifted in through the shattered roof. The sparks clung in the air for a heartbeat too long, before extinguishing like fleeting fragments of hope. Mireia's hand reached toward her, palm open, an invitation and a threat all at once. "Join me," she whispered. "Abandon the mortal coil. Cast aside the weakness of empathy. Become more than what you are. Or fall. There is no middle ground here." Althea did not move. She felt the temptation as a heat in her veins, the whisper of endless power, the lure of immortality without the weight of conscience. She saw herself in that path, a figure cloaked in light and shadow, faceless, endless, a martyr carved into the eternal cathedral of stars. And yet, she recoiled. "I am human," she said finally, voice low, reverent, carrying across the nave. "I will bear loss. I will carry doubt. I will witness." The words fell like hammers, resonating through the ruined nave. Mirea's eyes narrowed, pupils thin slits of light. She stepped closer, and the sound of her armor joined the slow rhythm of the falling chains. Bolter fire, memories of battle, the echoes of prayers said under volcanic ceilings. They all collided in Althea's mind. She saw every sister she had trained, every act of mercy, every life spared, every trial endured. "Then you refuse the gift," Mireia said, voice laced with sorrow and rage, folding inward as if tasting defeat before the fight began. "Then you choose decay. You choose mortality when the universe offers transcendence." Althea raised the Rosarius, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. "I choose to be witness," she said. "I choose to walk among the living and the dead, carrying their memory. I choose faith that burns in the heart, not stone in the hand." The rival's eyes flared, a deep molten green that seemed to ripple through her form. She raised a blade, thin and black as night distilled into metal. Althea's Rosarius gleamed faintly in response, a counterpoint of light. They advanced simultaneously, not with haste, but with the weight of inevitability, each step measured, deliberate, the distance between them shrinking across the burning nave like a slow-motion argument carved in shadow and fire. The first clash was quiet, almost ceremonial. Metal met metal in a muted note, echoing off the marble walls. Sparks leapt from the contact, drifting upward in suspended arcs, each one a frozen second. Althea did not strike with anger. She struck with clarity, with purpose, with the knowledge that each motion was as much a prayer as a blow. Mireia responded in kind, her movements a blur of precision, her form a reflection of what Althea could have been. Around them, the nave shivered. A beam cracked, falling in slow motion, colliding with a pew and sending shards of wood spinning through the air. Althea felt the vibrations through her bones, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat, matching the cadence of her hymn of witness. She moved again, faster now, each strike of blade and counterstrike, a syllable in the slow litany they were writing together. Mireia spoke between strikes, voice rising and falling in time with the music of combat. "Do you feel it? The eternity, the void beyond flesh. You cannot resist it forever." "I do not wish to resist it forever," Althea replied. "I wish to witness it, yes, but not to become it. Not yet. Not like this." The sound of falling chains grew louder, multiplied by echoes and memory. Stained glass cracked again, casting shards like blackened rain across the floor. Althea's vision flickered with glimpses of the past, her mentor's lessons, the initiations on volcanic stone, the first hymn, the first betrayal. She felt them all, held them all, and let them guide her strikes. They moved as if through a dream, each step measured, each strike deliberate, each breath a prayer. And in that dream, Althea realized that the trial was not about defeating Mireia. It was not about victory. It was about choosing mortality, choosing faith, choosing the slow, quiet fire that burned in hearts rather than in armor. The final strike came, not with noise, but with intention. Althea lowered her blade, letting it hover just above Mireia's. The rival's chest heaved, armor scorched and scratched, eyes searching Althea's for an answer, a surrender, a crack. But there was none. You see, Althea said softly, I do not fear what comes after. I only fear what is lost if I abandon it now. Mireia stepped back, blade lowering, and for a moment, the fire, the ash, the storm outside, all of it paused. They were not sisters, nor rivals, nor saints. They were witnesses, standing at the edge of eternity, letting time stretch around them like a prayer. The nave trembled. A final beam fell, shattering the last stained glass depiction of a saint. Snow and ash swirled through the hole in the roof, drifting between the two figures, suspended in the green light of the storm outside. The loyal sisters behind Althea exhaled softly, their hymn resuming, faint, deliberate, and eternal. Althea felt a strange peace settle into her chest, like cold steel forged in flame. She had endured the trial. She had seen the edge of eternity and not flinched. She had accepted loss, betrayal, mortality, and still chosen faith. Not the faith of stone or fire, but the quiet, dangerous faith that burns in hearts and endures beyond stars. And in that choice, she became something beyond neither human nor saint, a witness to a galaxy that would continue. The fortress trembled beneath the weight of its own ambition. Warp light spilled in sickly streaks across jagged walls, casting long, twisting shadows that writhed like serpents across the blood-stained stone. Althea moved steadily through the corridors, each step measured, every breath drawn, as if it were a silent litany. She could hear the echo of the fires behind her, the final rituals, the collapsing wards, the screams of instruments caught between planes. But she did not turn. There was nothing left to see except the path ahead and the ember of devotion she still carried within her chest. Mireia lay before her, not in triumph, but in the exhaustion of a life spent chasing what could never be claimed. The rival's armor, once gleaming with the unnatural light of corrupted rites, was now fractured, dull with smoke and ash. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breath, eyes still burning with defiance even as the corruption ebbed. She had sought to transcend mortality, to claim the eternal for herself, but Althea had refused the offer. In that refusal lay the force stronger than any warp spell, any inquisitor's cunning, any chain of ambition. Althea had chosen to remain human, and in that choice she had undone the ritual. The first tremors began subtly, as if the fortress itself were shuddering in recognition of the failure. A tower cracked, a rune-carved column splintered, and the floor beneath their feet began to hum with the resonance of collapsed wards. Althea lowered her rosarius and knelt beside Mireia, lifting her as gently as one could cradle a dying flame. The rival's fingers twitched, brushing against Althea's hand, grasping at something more than life. A connection, a confession, a final acknowledgement of defeat and understanding. You chose what I could not, Mireia whispered, voice hoarse but laced with a strange reverence. You chose mortality over power, over eternity. Althea pressed a finger to Mireia's lips, a gesture both sacred and intimate. There is no power in eternity if it is stolen from the heart, she murmured. The soul dies not in flesh, but in the forgetting of love, of mercy, of witness. I cannot follow you there, Mireia. Not today, not ever. The rival's eyes softened, a flicker of something human surfacing beneath the layers of ambition, armor, and corrupted energy. For a moment, she smiled, a thin, fragile curve, like a candle flame clinging to the edge of darkness. Then she coughed, smoke and ash rising from her lungs, and Althea felt the warmth leaving her body. There was no anger, no revenge, only the quiet surrender of a life spent chasing the impossible. The fortress roared in response, Warp light spilled in torrents now, black fire licking across corridors, twisting the air and refracting through fractured windows. Columns fell, altarpieces splintered, and the very walls of stone seemed to twist in slow-motion agony. Althea pressed Maria closer to her chest, moving with deliberate care. Every step was an act of devotion, every movement a prayer. The flames danced around them, illuminating the path to the outer doors, each step a testament to courage and restraint. She could hear the whispers of the dead, the echoes of battles fought in shadow and silence, the quiet hymns of sisters long gone. It was a chorus that had guided her through every trial, every betrayal, every vision that had threatened to shatter her faith. And now, as the fortress threatened to devour them both, that chorus became a river beneath her feet, carrying her forward, lifting her and Maria above the storm. The corridors narrowed, a gauntlet of fallen stone and twisted metal, until at last she reached the outer wall. Beyond it stretched the black expanse of the void, dotted with the frozen light of dying stars. She paused for a moment, inhaling the acrid tang of ash and ozone, and whispered a final hymn, a soft litany that rose above the roar of collapsing walls. Grant them rest, O Infinite One. Let mercy temper justice, and let witness endure beyond the flames. Maria's chest shuddered, a final breath escaping as Althea tightened her hold. She carried her rival across the threshold, stepping onto the ledge of the shattered fortress. Below, the abyss yawned, and the last of the warp fire coiled in screaming torrents, consuming stone, metal, and corruption alike. Althea felt the ember of life in Maria flicker, fragile but luminous, as if acknowledging the mercy that had spared her from the unnatural transformation she had sought. The fortress groaned, a living thing in pain, and Althea moved with deliberate grace, guiding Maria along the precarious path to safety. Each step was punctuated by falling debris, collapsing battlements, and the distant echoes of wards and spells unmade. Althea did not rush. There was no need for haste. Time had stretched thin in this final trial, and each moment became sacred, each breath a sacrament. At last, she reached solid ground, a plateau of volcanic stone carved by ancient hands, untouched by the collapse of the fortress. The sisters who had followed in her wake emerged, their faces pale with ash and relief, weapons lowered but ready, eyes wide with awe and fear. They formed a silent circle around her and the rival, a sanctuary within the storm. Maria's eyes, once hard and implacable, now glimmered with understanding. She did not speak. She did not reach for power. She only allowed herself to be carried, to be saved, to be a witness to the mercy that Althea had chosen to grant. The ember of her ambition, so long burning, had been tempered by humanity, and in that tempering, a form of redemption had been born. Althea knelt beside her rival, murmuring another hymn, this one quieter, more intimate. It was a song of absolution, a confession of hope, a final act of devotion to a galaxy that had demanded so much and given so little. She felt the warmth of Maria's body fade, and yet she also felt the lingering light of the ember, the choice made, the mercy given, the faith unbroken. The sisters joined in, softly, reverently. A choir of voices, small and fragile against the vast cathedral of stars, singing not for victory, not for triumph, but for witness. Each word was a bead on the rosarius of time, each syllable a prayer cast into the void. The storm outside mirrored their hymn, yet it was no longer an adversary. The snow and ash swirled in suspended grace, the warp light dimmed to embers, and the universe seemed to pause, acknowledging the choice made here at the edge of eternity. Althea rose, supporting Morea's failing body with care and reverence. She turned to face the plateau, the remnants of the fortress behind her, and the infinite void stretching ahead. There was no fear, no longing for power, no temptation to ascend beyond the mortal coil. Only the quiet, dangerous faith that had guided her through every trial, every betrayal, every vision of what might be and what must not. The final notes of their hymn lingered in the air, mingling with the hiss of falling ash and the distant crackle of warp fire. Althea closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the pulse of life within herself, within the sisters, within the dying rival cradled against her chest. She felt the weight of every choice, every sacrifice, every ember of devotion that had led to this moment. And then she spoke softly, as if to the universe itself. We bear witness, always, not to conquer, not to command, but to remember, to preserve what is sacred, to honor what endures. The wind shifted, carrying the last of the black fire outward, scattering it into the void. The fortress trembled one final time and collapsed inward, taking with it the rituals, the ambition, the corruption, and leaving only the stones, the ash, and the quiet survivors. Althea set Morea gently upon the stone, murmuring a final hymn over her. Rest now, she whispered. Your choices are yours, as mine are mine. We end not as enemies, but as witnesses, and in that, there is a grace the universe cannot deny. The sisters gathered closer, forming a protective ring, eyes scanning the horizon for lingering threats. But there were none. The storm subsided. The warp light faded. The black snow settled in gentle layers over the volcanic stone, silent as a prayer. Althea gazed at the horizon, where distant stars blinked like the final sparks of a dying fire. She felt the weight of the galaxy, its endless struggles, its wars and betrayals, but also the fragile, persistent ember of devotion that had carried them all through the trials. She had witnessed, she had chosen, and she had survived, not as a saint, not as a warrior, but as a keeper of memory, a bearer of faith, a witness to the edge of eternity. And in that quiet, dangerous space, she understood the truth of her vocation. It was not to ascend, not to conquer, not to dominate. It was to endure, to preserve, to bear, as a witness. And in that endurance, she had lit the last ember of devotion. The sun hung low over Ophelia. 7, a dying ember bleeding across a sky of ash and violet. The cloister lay in silence, vast halls carved from stone now cracked and scarred, alcoves filled with rubble, and banners torn as if to commemorate the ghosts that had once carried them. Althea walked alone, her boots crunching softly over fragments of glass and shattered icons, each step a careful meditation on what had been lost and what had endured. The order was no more. Its towers lay in ruin, its rites dissolved into memory, its ambitions scattered like smoke in the void. She moved slowly, letting her fingers brush against broken pews and collapsed pillars, tracing the echo of lives that had been devoted to causes greater than themselves, yet smaller than the universe itself. Each surface held a story, a trace of devotion, a reminder of faith that had been both luminous and blind. Althea's heart, though heavy, carried a quiet gratitude. The galaxy was larger now, colder, indifferent in its scale. Yet there was a faint glimmer of something warmer, hope, fragile and flickering, but real. The silence was near total. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, drifting through shattered windows and open doors like a ghost of the past. In the cloister's central hall, once the heart of devotion and ceremony, she paused. Candles, once hundreds, had been extinguished by the chaos, leaving the room dark except for a single small flame, flickering stubbornly in a brazier. Its light was weak, trembling against the vast shadow, yet it was enough. Althea knelt before it, feeling the heat against her palms and remembering the faces of those who had fallen, of Mireia and the sisters who had survived, of all the fragile lives stitched into the Order's tapestry. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for vengeance, not for guidance, not even for redemption, but for witness, for the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had remembered what had been and had chosen to endure. The flame seemed to answer, a tiny heartbeat in the void, a pulse of warmth that mirrored the ember she had carried through the trials, the ember that had refused to be consumed by ambition, rage, or fear. Althea rose, her eyes scanning the silent cloister. The halls stretched endlessly, corridors twisting into shadow, alcoves filled with dust, the relics of centuries now mute. Here, in the aftermath, she saw the cost of choices, the weight of immortality, and the quiet beauty of mortal devotion. Every decision she had made, every refusal, every act of mercy, had shaped not only her own fate, but the echo of countless others. She understood, with a clarity that was both liberating and terrifying, that power alone did not define legacy. Witness did. The galaxy beyond Ophelia, Seven felt immense and empty, stars distant, their light cold. And yet, in that vastness, Althea perceived the faint pulse of life, the whisper of possibility. Mortality, fleeting and fragile, had a beauty that eternity could never touch. Every loss, every sorrow, every sacrifice had carved space for this moment. This quiet realization, this single flame still burning against the dark. She walked through the cloister one last time, touching the remnants of walls, the shards of stained glass, the splintered altars, each act a silent acknowledgement of the past. The memories of battle, of confrontation, of choices heavy and sharp were still there, etched into stone and shadow. But so was something else, a promise that the light of devotion, however small, could survive the collapse of orders, of empires, of gods, and rituals alike. At the edge of the central courtyard, Althea paused. The horizon stretched wide, barren and beautiful, touched by the dim glow of twin dying suns. She closed her eyes and let the wind wash over her, carrying with it the remnants of sound, falling chains, cracking stone, the faintest echo of hymns. And she allowed herself a small, bitter smile. Not for triumph, not for vengeance, not even for survival, but for witnessing, for being present in the delicate persistence of life. The cloister would crumble further in time. The Order's name would fade from memory, spoken only in whispers and tales. But somewhere in the ruins, the flame persisted, a single, defiant ember, small, fragile, and yet undeniably alive. Althea left it there, a token of what had endured, a quiet defiance against the void. She turned away and walked toward the horizon, her figure merging with shadow and light, carrying with her the weight of choices, the memory of devotion, and the knowledge that the universe, immense and indifferent, still allowed space for hope. The wind shifted again, scattering the last of the black ash, rustling the tattered banners, and the small flame flickered but did not waver. Althea's steps carried her onward, each one steady, deliberate, and imbued with the calm clarity of someone who had seen the edge of eternity and chosen to return. The galaxy stretched before her, vast, cold, and silent. But in the quiet, a whisper of promise lingered. A promise born not of power, not of ambition, but of witness, mercy, and enduring devotion. She paused once more at the threshold of the cloister, looking back over the ruins. The wind carried away the last remnants of the ritual, the final echoes of ambition and corruption. And there, In the center of the hall, the lone flame burned on. It did not shout. It did not demand attention. It simply existed. And in that existence, Althea found the truth she had carried across the edge of eternity. That light, no matter how small, could persist in the coldest dark. And that devotion, even in the absence of all else, was enough. She turned toward the horizon, toward the endless expanse of stars, carrying with her the quiet weight of memory and mercy. The galaxy would continue, vast and indifferent, but within it, a single ember of devotion remained, a witness to all that had been lost and all that had been saved. And in that ember, the story ended.